So thanks very much, everyone, for joining us on this seminar of the Horizons in STEM Higher Education Network. My name is Alice Robson from the University of Bristol, and I'm going to be chairing this session today. Just a reminder, everyone, that this session will be recorded, and the recording will be available via our YouTube channel afterwards. Just before I hand over to our speaker, I wanted to remind you about a couple of other events happening across the Horizons in STEM network. Firstly, we've got our annual conference happening at Royal Holloway this year in June. So the abstract submission for that has now closed, and we're currently reviewing abstracts. But registration for that conference will open on the 16th of March and close on the 9th of June. So make sure you don't miss that opportunity to come and join us at Royal Holloway. And there's a link there. We've also got a couple of other events coming up in the Horizons in STEM network. So we've got a series of monthly peer support drop-in sessions, and the final one of those is next month on the 16th of March, 1 till 2. And then our next sort of seminar event is kind of a follow-up to this one, really, talking about the use of focus groups and follow-up questionnaires. That will be on Wednesday, the 6th of May. So all of our seminars are online and free, so you can book for free at our website, UK STEM Network, and again, there's a QR code there. But back to today, I'm very delighted to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Hannah Grist from the Bristol Institute for Learning and for Teaching and Learning, built here at the University of Bristol. So Hannah is a senior lecturer in academic practice at the university, and also head of CREATE, which is our program which supports staff members, including myself, into different fellowship levels of advanced HE. And she's going to be giving us an introduction to qualitative research methods for educational research. And obviously this is going to be very important to lots of us in the STEM field that maybe have a lot more confidence in the quantitative than the qualitative methods. So I'll stop sharing now and hand over to Hannah for her seminar. So just a reminder, if you've got questions, please do use the chat function, and we should have time for questions at the end. So if you want to share your slides, Hannah.
Lovely, will do.
Yep, I can see that.
Excellent. Fabulous. Let me just fiddle around on this screen as well so I can see people. Perfect. Okay. Can everybody hear me okay as well? Let me know if there are any troubles hearing, or if anything goes wrong, feel free to pop into the chat. Lovely. Thanks, Susan. So hello, thank you very much for having me. Thanks, Alice, for inviting me. Really excited to spend a bit of time with you this afternoon talking through an introduction to qualitative data analysis methods, particularly thinking about educational research in higher education. So this is what I hope to achieve together by the end of our short time together, hoping that you'll have an opportunity to get a bit of an understanding about the purpose of qualitative data analysis for educational research, to help you think through some common approaches. So we're going to look at a few of them broadly, and then one of them in detail. We're going to focus in on thematic analysis, and we're going to together do a bit of a practice, a bit of a hands-on coding exercise, very low stakes, nothing difficult, but in research contexts. So hopefully that sounds okay. That's the plan for our time together. And what I'd like to do, if possible, is kind of learn a little bit about you. So who are you? Where are you now with questions of qualitative research? So if I could ask you, please, to either use a device and use the QR code on the screen to visit menti.com, or you can go to menti.com and use the code that's there on the screen. And there are a few questions there, and we'll work through them. The first question, as you will see, is what kind of research methods are you currently using? What do you typically use? So that's where we'll start. Hopefully you can see the Menti now. Lovely. So I can see that we have people joining the Menti and a response so far, and hopefully you can see that too. Great stuff. So a couple of votes for surveys so far, focus groups, qualitative and quantitative analysis, qualitative currently, reflexive textual analysis, or thematic analysis of interviews in the coding phase. Brilliant. Somebody's doing the thing already. Excellent. More surveys, quants, mostly quants, skills like things like skills inventories, like item surveys. Lovely. Questionnaires, but planning focus groups. So it sounds like the seminar that's coming up in a few months' time will be super helpful for the colleague who shared that they're planning focus groups. Mainly surveys, lovely. Lots and lots of surveys coming through, focus groups, interviews. Great stuff. So please do feel free to keep your responses coming. Semi-structured interviews, thematic analysis, hooray. Wonderful. So sort of 10, 15 seconds longer, you're hurriedly typing a response. Please continue. Great stuff. Amazing. Somebody's planning to do a phenomenological analysis in the future. Wonderful. Surveys and interviews. Lovely stuff. Okay. So this is where we are now, where you are now, the kinds of methods that you're typically using. I'd like to get a sense of where you are now with educational research. So thinking about researching your teaching or support for learning practice, if that's something that you've done or plan to do. Do you feel confident? So this should bring up a kind of sliding scale. How do you feel? Do you feel very confident with educational research? And then the second part of this question is around where you are now with qualitative data analysis. Lovely, thank you. Can see the chart moving up and down as people respond. Thank you very much. Excellent. Just a little bit longer on that one. Brilliant. Thank you very much, colleagues. So we've kind of met at 2.9 on both questions there for a moment. Okay, perfect. So nobody here, or on average rather, so it might be that somebody does feel very, very confident, but mostly we're kind of somewhere in the middle in terms of our levels of confidence around educational research and qualitative data analysis. So hopefully quite a good place to take this seminar forwards. Thank you very much. And this is for me a sense of what you're hoping for today. So this is a free text response. What is it that you hope to get out of this short workshop this afternoon? This could be a couple of sentences, it could be a word or two, however you feel comfortable responding. What made you sign up to this session this afternoon? What are you hoping to learn about or get out of this session? Excellent. Thank you very much. Wonderful. Excellent. Thank you all so much for sharing. So lots of requests for kind of ideas, hints, tips, how to get started, learn a bit more about thematic analysis in particular. So I'm very glad that that is the method that I decided to focus on for this session. Awareness of blind spots, lovely, thank you. Broader understanding. Recommended software. Okay, so that's actually not something I will be exploring in this session in particular, but whoever made the Menti post about software, happy to follow up with you outside of the session and talk through different options as well. Clarity and guidance. Lovely. Okay. Super. So we're seeing lots of posts coming through. That's super helpful and is really useful for me to get a flavour of what you're hoping to learn about and to achieve together during this workshop. And I will do my very best to meet those aims. So I'm just going to stop sharing the Menti and move back to my slides. Let me just share my screen again. Would somebody give me a thumbs up if they can see slides again? Lovely. Thank you very much. It's interesting. You migrate between different platforms for teaching online. Was on Zoom for so long and we moved over to Teams. So now Zoom feels really unfamiliar. So thank you for your patience as I fiddle around with the different slides. Lovely. Thank you very much. I hope that that was useful to you as it was for me. So we're going to start in with this first question. So what is educational research? What's the point in it? Why would we consider doing educational research? Well, as you can see here, educational research is systematic. So it's a systematic inquiry into teaching and learning and educational contexts. So it's a really intentional, reflective process where you want to investigate something to do with teaching and learning. It asks questions about not just what's happening within a particular curriculum, but how education is working, how it can be improved, and it draws on multiple traditions of inquiry. So educational research aims to improve our understandings and it aims to improve our practices in education. So the ultimate goal is to generate knowledge that enhances educational practice, that enhances policy and also ultimately student outcomes. So educational research is a way to challenge assumptions and to make visible the complexities of what learning and teaching and what it means to be a student and a teacher in higher education today. So educational research draws on multiple paradigms. So it's not just a qualitative realm, but it draws upon quantitative and mixed methods approaches as well. So, excuse me, let me just nip back. So no one paradigm kind of dominates and mixed methods research is becoming increasingly prominent in educational research as well. So educational research, it's all about exploring processes, outcomes, experiences. It's a really broad field. It's broad in scope, broad in nature, and it can investigate things from classroom teaching to assessment practices, policies, and student experiences. So here you can kind of think about educational research on a continuum. So the kind of micro level, so exploring individual learning, all the way up to the macro level, so thinking about national policy. So reflecting on what your research interests are, you might find that you're kind of more towards the micro level, or maybe somewhere in between, or all the way up to the macro level. So what is educational research? And let's have a think then about qualitative research. So I'm sure you're well aware qualitative research focuses in on depth and on meaning and on context. So it makes it a really apposite method with which to explore questions of education. So it's really valuable for exploring lived experiences of learners and teachers. So rather than aiming for kind of generalizability in a qualitative research project, we're looking to explore depth and richness of different participants' perspectives within their own kind of contexts. So that term context is key. So learning environments are shaped not just by the content that's being delivered, whether that's in a chemistry degree or a biology degree, but learning environments are also informed by and shaped by classroom culture and the identities of the learners within those classrooms, as well as the institutional structures around them. So there are a range of common methods that we see when we look at qualitative research, and we could see them coming through on the Menti already with colleagues sharing that you're already engaging, some of you, in qualitative research methods. So there are several methods here, and these are kind of the core techniques that you might think about when you're gathering qualitative data. To have interviews, whether they're semi-structured or narrative, and these offer participants the opportunity to kind of articulate really personal experiences in a one-to-one format usually. So if you're interested, you can look at the work of Vale and Brinkman from 2015 that explores the value of qualitative interviewing a bit more. Focus groups, which again, you're going to hear a bit more about in a forthcoming seminar, they are a method that really helps to encourage group discussion, and it highlights the social dimensions of learning if you're exploring educational research questions. Participant observations are another really useful qualitative research method, and this can be through a range of different environments. So you might be observing student interactions in classrooms, lectures, labs, or online. These tend to capture behaviours and interactions in the way that people react or interact with one another within different learning environments or contexts. And then finally, we might think about doing document analysis when we're looking at doing some qualitative research. So you might be looking at large swathes of textual information, such as student work or syllabi, curricula, maybe a batch of reflective journals. And by carrying out a document analysis, you'll be able to explore, again, this idea around experience, depth of meaning, and individual contexts. So qualitative methods complement quantitative approaches, so it doesn't replace quantitative methods, but is a complementary approach by addressing the kinds of questions that numbers can't fully answer on their own. So we're seeing in STEM education increasingly mixed methods approaches being adopted. So for example, if you're planning a survey, you might learn about broad trends of what's happening in a particular context. But you might want to supplement that with an interview to follow up and help to explain why that pattern might be occurring and help to understand the motivations behind particular behaviours and so on. And again, I saw that coming through on the Menti that you shared your responses to earlier on. So qualitative methods help answer the why and the how, not just the what, in other words. So hopefully none of this feels particularly challenging or brand new, and it's kind of building on what you already know. And I'm seeing, again, going back to the Menti, that you're already kind of combining different methods and working on developing kind of a mixed methods approach for some projects that you're involved in. So that's a kind of starting point. So what is educational research? What is qualitative research? And now I want to explore some of the common qualitative data analysis approaches. So QDA, qualitative data analysis. So there are 4 here on the screen, and I heard or saw on the Menti thematic analysis coming up a couple of times already. So that's fabulous. And there's some other examples here. So we'll go through them a little bit. So thematic analysis is a super flexible qualitative data analysis method that's usually used to identify and analyze and report on themes, unsurprisingly, thematic analysis. And in this, themes are patterns of meaning, and we're looking across qualitative sets of data to generate those themes. And this can be a particularly useful method in higher education research because it's a really easy way in. It's a great starting point for those that are new to qualitative research, and it allows you to capture student experiences, challenges that they might be going through, or deal with issues that come up through your qualitative methods. I'm going to explore the process of thematic analysis in a few slides' time, or in the next slide maybe, and explore what that looks like. So how would you actually go about doing a thematic analysis? But what I would really recommend is, if you haven't already, is go to Braun and Clark's original paper from 2006. It's been updated since, I think, in 2022 or 2023, but Braun and Clark's work is foundational on this particular topic, and I think you'll really value reading the original paper. Grounded theory is another common approach that you will hear about, I'm sure, in your explorations around qualitative research methods. So grounded theory, again, it's a kind of systematic methodology where the theory is emerging from the data set rather than the data kind of leading you in another direction, kind of imposing the theory onto it. So grounded theory can be a really helpful tool to explore higher education learning environments because it can often help to explore under-theorized issues. So, for example, we might use a grounded theory approach to explore how first-generation students develop a sense of belonging in higher education, for example. So some of the key features of grounded theory include constant comparison, so reviewing your the codes, and again I'll explain a bit more about this later on, and constantly comparing them, writing memos and carefully documenting your process of analysis, and being very iterative in that approach. So you might go between analysing your data and collecting more, analysing your data, collecting more, kind of iterating between those two parts of the process. So Sharmaz's work from 2014 is an excellent place to start if you're feeling drawn to grounded theory as an approach. It's not just about coding, it's about theorising from the data upwards. We move on to content analysis. So content analysis, again, as with all these methods, it's systematic. Content analysis is an approach to kind of categorizing usually larger volumes of textual or visual data. So it's often used in higher education as a method to review big bulk documents, so policy text or huge numbers of course evaluations or multiple iterations of curriculum content. So this is an approach that is possibly a little bit closer to more quantitative approaches, in that content analysis tends to involve instances of counting. So counting how often something comes up, drawing kind of numerical inferences from that information. So discourse analysis, the last one, before we drill down a little bit more into thematic analysis. Discourse analysis examines how language is used to construct meaning and identity and social reality. So looking at a higher education context, it can be really helpful to help us understand how the language that we're using in our teaching, in our guidance materials, in our policy texts, or within our classroom discourse is being experienced by students. So, for example, you often hear terms like excellence or student engagement or inclusion. What do those words really mean? And content analysis, discourse analysis can really help us to unpack what that meaning is. So meaning is not just in the words, but they're constructed through them. And the work of G from 2014 is a really helpful place to help us understand the way that discourse analysis works. So again, I would really recommend that, that paper if you're interested in learning a little bit more. So I just wanted to kind of take all of that and put it into an applied example so you can maybe see a little bit more what this might look like in practice. So I'd like you to imagine that we've carried out interviews with 20 first-year students on their experiences of transitioning into academic life. And these interviews are taking place towards the end of their first year. So if we were then to carry out a thematic analysis of those interview transcripts, we might be looking for themes, right? So we might find themes like overwhelmed or imposter syndrome or social connections. So if we had applied a thematic analysis approach, those are the kinds of themes that we might generate. If we took the same set of interview transcripts and instead decided that we were going to carry out a grounded theory type analysis, we'd be looking to build a model that can explain how students are transitioning into higher education, or how they maybe have failed to transition into higher education or university life. So grounded theory, we're looking to build a model, a theory, an explanation for this kind of concept of transition. If we were to take the same set of transcripts again and apply a content analysis approach, we would be looking a little bit more at the kind of significance or the numerical significance of what's in the data set. So for example, we might pull out the fact that in 15 out of the 20 transcripts we've looked at, 15 of them mentioned that they felt overwhelmed by the volume of work that they had to do in their first year. And that tells us something. So the content analysis approach, a little bit more quantitative in that it's focusing in on numbers, but it's what does that mean? What's the meaning behind that significance of the number of people? And then finally, if we were to take that set of transcripts and instead carry out discourse analysis, we might be trying to find out a little bit more around what students mean by the term struggle, for example. So we might see that coming up time and time again. And then we might think about, okay, well, what does the university kind of do with that particular concept? So institutional language often frames the idea of a struggle as kind of part of the journey of, becoming a student in higher education. So hopefully that's a kind of helpful way just to see the different but kind of connected and overlapping qualitative data analysis approaches that you might do with the same set of data. So you might be thinking, could I mix these approaches? Would that be something that is possible, that is desirable? And I think the answer is it depends. So it depends on the aim of your research project or on your research questions. So if you're aiming to describe patterns, thematic analysis on its own would be a perfectly acceptable method. If you are planning to build a model or theorize or create a framework, grounded theory, if you want to try to quantify presence or significance of something, content analysis, or if you're interested in interrogating language and power, then it should be discourse analysis that you choose. But you can combine these different layers of qualitative data analysis if each of those approaches kind of answers a different layer of your research question, but you would really need a clear rationale to avoid any kind of methodological inconsistency. I can see the chat is, let me just try to find the chat. I could see it flashing. Okay, somebody has to leave, that's all good. And Heather asks, what's the difference between thematic and content analysis, as workload could be a theme? Absolutely, you're completely right. So workload would be a theme. In content analysis, if you'd identified that there were 15 people saying workload, then what you'd be doing is kind of saying, this is probably one of the most important pieces of information that has emerged from this data set. So you prioritize that in your report, whereas in a thematic analysis, workload might be one of 5 or 6 themes, and it may not feel as significant as some of the other ones because you haven't got that same level of kind of weighting, numerical weighting behind it. But you're absolutely right, workload would be a theme as well. Hope that helps answer the question. How are we all doing? I feel like I'm talking a lot because I am. Are there any other questions, any comments, any? Oh, thank you. Feeling very needy here with asking for thumbs up and things. I can't see any faces, which is, teaching online is a lovely thing, but harder to tell if people are all good or not. So I appreciate the thumbs up and the hearts. That's lovely. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Camilla. Absolutely, you could do a combination of thematic analysis and content analysis to analyze focus group discussions, definitely. So again, it will kind of depend on the research questions that you're asking. So, are you searching for themes? Are you looking to try and find out what's kind of most significant in terms of to the greatest number of people? So if you are concerned about the greatest number of people raising something, then adding in that content analysis layer to the discussion would be completely legitimate and make complete sense. All good, all good. Thanks, Laura. Fabulous. Yeah, it sometimes helps just to see what that would look like in practice and make it less kind of theoretical. Oh, sorry, Anna, that you had a fire alarm. I'm hoping that everything is okay. You're back, so that's a good sign. Excellent. Okay, fabulous. If there are any other questions that kind of come up as we go, feel free to pop them in the chat as well. That's all good. A yearly exercise. Yeah. Fabulous. Okay. So let's kind of focus in on thematic analysis in particular, because I think I mentioned already, this to me it feels like one of the most accessible methods for people that are just starting out with qualitative research and qualitative data analysis techniques. And it's one that gives us a lot. It's really rich and it can give us lots and lots of really helpful information, regardless of the research question that we're asking. So this technique is iterative and it represents a very flexible process. So it's not a linear kind of process, hence representing it here as a cycle. So researchers tend to kind of move backwards and forwards between phases as their understanding deepens. So what I'll do here is we go back. Sorry. What I'll do is kind of explain and explore those different sections. So this diagram comes from Sam McLeod's chapter. And I realise I'm recommending lots of reading and you may not have a lot of time, but this is a nice chapter that helps you kind of figure out which part of the process happens where. But essentially, we start at the top, so familiarising ourselves with data. So that could be a set of interview transcripts. That could be some focus group data. So you've got a transcript of what happened at a focus group. It could be the qualitative responses on a survey, whatever it might be. So the first stage is kind of working through that data, reading it, becoming familiar with it, kind of immersing yourself in that data. The second stage is to generate some initial codes. So this is the idea that you are highlighting pieces or extracts that are interesting. So features of that particular transcript or that data. So things that leap out at you, things that feel significant. Once you've done that, and you have a whole set of codes, you then start to try to group them together to search for themes, to thematize them. Once you have a set of themes, you're likely to have many more themes than you have space to really write about, either in your article or your report or whatever it is that you're looking to produce as a result of this piece of data collection. So you need to review them and think about them. So Liz, are codes individual words or could be words that mean the same thing? They can be individual words, they can be phrases, they could be, and it depends on the kind of data you're collecting, they can even be images or particular kind of signifiers, physical or visual signifiers. So yeah, it can be anything, which isn't particularly helpful as a response, I appreciate. But yeah, it can also be words that mean the same thing. Absolutely. So once you have kind of reduced the number of themes that you have, kind of regrouped them, reorganized them, you're defining them, you're naming them, then you have a kind of structure that enables you to start writing or producing the report as it has here. So you can think of the process of thematic analysis as a bit like pattern detection. So instead of numerical data, we're analysing language essentially. So if any of you here are involved in modelling or signal processing, coding or experimental analysis, this kind of thing might feel a little bit familiar. So when I use the word data, I mean transcripts, I mean focus group, transcripts, that kind of thing. Codes, they're the features or the labelled units of meaning. themes are the kind of higher order patterned explanations of the codes that we've put together. So the goal in thematic analysis isn't word counting. So in content analysis, there's another kind of step that is about counting, and it is about numerical significance. That is not the case in thematic analysis. The aim of thematic analysis is to identify the patterns of meaning across the data set. How does that feel? Does that feel okay? Does that feel super confusing? I have no idea. Give me a thumbs up if we're all okay. Lovely, thank you. The reason I asked for that is because I promised that I'd give you an opportunity to maybe have a little go at this. And with a weather eye on the time, I'd like to move on to that if that's okay. So again, I would like you to imagine that we've carried out some interviews. This time we finished interviewing second year students. And this time, instead of thinking about their experiences of transition, now we're interested in their experiences of active learning in lectures. So we've done the interviews and we have some interview transcripts. And I'm going to share with you an extract from one of these imaginary transcripts on the next slide. And what I'd like you to do, please, is generate some code. So what I'd like you to do is type 1, 2, or 3 words or phrases in the chat that stands out to you from this excerpt. And it might be that you are typing and colleagues say the same thing. That's okay. Share in the chat 1 to 3 words or a couple of words that stand out to you from this extract. Lovely. Thank you. Yep. Lovely. Thank you very much. So Susan, you've gone to the end process. So you keep this in mind, what you've said in the chat, Susan. You've taken the codes and already kind of trying to understand what they mean, what this tells you. And I think that's an amazing thing that you've shared in the chat. Lovely, lovely. Thank you. Okay, so we have lots of posts coming through in the chat. Thank you very much. So this is what I was thinking you would share, and indeed you did. So these are the kind of codes that are emerging from that very short kind of extract. So this idea around waste of time, being uncomfortable, thinking that there are gaps, made me realize, have better memory, misunderstanding, all of the things that you shared in the chat. So thank you very much. You've just been generating codes. So these short labels that capture meaningful features of the text. So you're not summarizing, you're tagging what seems analytically interesting from that particular extract. Perfect. Step 1 complete. Moving on then to another extract from the same transcript. So again, just another couple of sentences, but what does this reveal to you? Is there anything new? Any other words? Lovely, thank you very much. So same again, share in the chat for me, that would be great. Lovely. Excellent. Thank you very much. Fabulous. Okay, so the chat seems to have slowed down. So there's a question in the chat from Sarah. Hi, Sarah. Can or do codes emerge? Have been called out on that by journal reviewers in the past. I'm not sure if I understand the question fully, Sarah. If you are happy to sort of expand a little bit in the chat as we move into the next slide, I can pick that back up. Definitely. And we're going to talk about publishing and journals in the final slide, so it might come back there if that's okay. Perfect, lovely. Okay, so I can see that there are layers of overlap between some of the things that you picked out in the first um, transcript extract and the second. So ideas around being uncomfortable, being forced to think, stressful kind of coming through, passive and active learning coming through as well. So we're seeing overlap. We're seeing new pieces of information or new codes emerge. Okay, so we've done a process of coding, and now it might be time to kind of think about a particular theme. So I move to the next slide. So I have three suggested interpretations from these excerpts. Which of the following do you think best captures the pattern? Do you think what you've seen so far from that coding exercise suggests that students dislike active learning, or that productive discomfort enhances learning, or that we should remove lectures entirely? Yeah, so it's I guess A and C were a little bit leading in the respect of the way they were written. But you can feel echoes of both of those kind of in the data. So it does feel in part that students don't feel particularly comfortable with active learning. Maybe the word dislike is too strong. Um, we didn't hear students sort of saying we should take lectures out entirely. However, we do feel that we're left with the idea that engaging in active learning doesn't feel comfortable, but it is productive, and students felt that they had learned something. So what we've done, literally just super quickly, based only on two short paragraphs, is developed a theme. So we've moved from kind of descriptive codes to an interpretive theme. And this idea, this interpretive theme, productive discomfort enhances learning, that might be something that we then take as part of our report or our publication. And that's one of the kind of sections, that's one of our findings. And that's what we then flesh out and explore in more detail. So how do we then work with that theme? What does that process look like? So we have our theme and we want to move from description to explanation. So what do we do with that? So we might want to stress test that particular theme against the wider data set. So interrogate the pattern that we think we're seeing. So does that kind of pattern, does that theme recur across participants or contexts, looking across the wider data set? Or are there areas where it doesn't hold true? Are there any negative or deviant cases? And what might that tell us? So we want to interrogate that pattern. We might also want to situate it in relation to existing theory. So in our particular example, we are thinking about active learning and lectures and that kind of thing. So we might go to some of the scholarship around self-regulated learning, maybe something to do with threshold concepts, for example. So doing this, we ultimately want to transform our descriptive theme into an analytical claim. So the key shift is from what participants said, so what students said in those interviews, to what that means. So what does this pattern help us to understand, or what does this pattern help us to explain? So hopefully that makes sense. I think I spotted a question in the chat, and I want to return to it. So if I don't answer it, I will come back to it at the end. Please don't let me forget, because I can't find it in the chat right now. Perfect. Okay. Are there any queries or questions around that kind of space here around working with themes, interrogating patterns, and so on? I can see a hand. Grace.
Yeah, so I just had a chat in it was in a question in the chat, is how do you avoid applying your own bias? So like that example you gave there, where the students saying things like uncomfortable and feeling forced, like actually the way that's written sounds incredibly negative, but as educators we're like, well, that's pushing them out their comfort zone, etc. So we could be applying our own bias that suggests that's a good thing. So how do you avoid kind of applying your own bias when you're kind of maybe misinterpreting the way the student said something and applying your own sort of positive bias when maybe they meant it negatively?
That's a really, really good question. And I think one of the really important parts of qualitative approaches is recognizing who you are as a researcher and what those biases are and what your motivations are for studying, for researching. So that's a really good question that links in really well with this final slide, which is around kind of rigor and kind of acknowledging who we are and how we influence and how our particular, as you call it, our particular biases might influence or shape our interpretation. So thank you very much for that question. And if you're happy, I'll explore it in detail in relation to this slide. So yeah, I'm hoping that you found so far what we've been exploring kind of helpful and an insight into the process. And as I've mentioned, it's quite straightforward. It's quite an engaging approach, I think, when you get into it, especially when you've got lots of really rich data. It can be really interesting and rewarding experience as a researcher. But there are things to consider and things to kind of hold a question mark over, as Grace has raised, in particular around questions around bias. But we also usually get questions about rigor. And often this comes up in relation to qualitative approaches as a reason not to do it. And I find that when researchers are asking about rigor, they're often asking, well, where's the control? Where's the reproducibility? Where's the rigor? And actually in thematic analysis, I would argue that rigor comes from kind of four main places. So first is this idea that the approach is systematic. And this is a term I've used a few times throughout this session this afternoon. So we're not cherry picking just interesting quotes and only analysing them. We're coding across the whole data set and we're moving backwards and forwards between the data and the themes. We're actively looking for deviant or contradictory cases that are challenging our interpretation. So we're not just looking for the shiny bits that kind of prove what we want them to say, but we're looking across the whole piece, moving backwards and forwards, and again, including discussion of those deviant or contradictory cases as need to. The second piece is around transparency. So we're trying to make our analytic decisions visible. So why have we clustered these codes together? Why have we named the theme in this way? What kind of theoretical lenses are we using? What kinds of scholarship are we drawing upon? So being able to kind of really tell that story as to how you got from transcript set all the way down to kind of a polished set of themes is really important, and usually will feature in your research methods section of a report or a publication. And then we come to reflexivity. So this is kind of linking to Grace's question a moment ago. So reflexivity is really important. And unlike in many quantitative approaches, in qualitative paradigms, we tend to try to acknowledge upfront that we are part of the methodology. So we're part of the analytic instrument. So our disciplinary backgrounds, our assumptions, our research questions, they shape what we notice. And that's okay. We're not striving to kind of take the person out of the research. Rigor involves being explicit about that influence and kind of not pretending that it doesn't exist. So again, being upfront and exactly in the example that you gave, Grace, the student may have expressed this as a negative, but given the fact that I'm a teacher, given the fact that I understand the nature of academic challenge, I'm interpreting these words in this particular way. So being really upfront about that can help make your approach more rigorous. So hopefully that helps with your question as well. And then the last space here is around coherence. So a strong thematic analysis tells a clear and internally consistent story. So the theme should meaningfully fit the data set and collectively explain something important, not just describe surface patterns. So rigor is really about making that interpretation systematic, transparent, and theoretically grounded. So making the story coherent and be meaningful to those that read it. So moving to the end of the session, so we have a few minutes left together. So I'm hopeful that this quick introduction to qualitative methods has been helpful. And what we've tried to do is highlight that qualitative research is all about depth. It's about thinking about the why and the how, not just the what. So if you're planning to do some educational research, you might want to start quite small. Obviously, time is a finite thing, especially these days. So experimenting with qualitative methods is a really great thing to do. But you might want to start with kind of some short interviews, some small focus groups, rather than anything massive. We haven't had time in this session to explore ethics, but be sure to check in with your institutional frameworks and ethics teams around what's permitted and what isn't within your individual institutions, because ethics in qualitative research, just like quantitative research, is super important. I have got some recommended readings, and I've been flagging up papers and authors throughout this session, and there's some recommended readings on the final slide. But if you do feel like exploring this any further, please do take a peek at some of that reading. And then finally, I wondered if you might just answer the final question on the Menti, so an exit Menti, which is, what is one thing you're hoping to, what is one thing that you're planning to take away from this session today? And I'll just navigate back to that. I'll just stop sharing and go back to the Menti. So it's the same Menti as before, so menti.com, and the code is 3418. So I'm just going to share on the screen. Hopefully that's working. Great, lovely. Fabulous. I can see thoughts coming through. And feel free not to respond if you're kind of not sure, if you're kind of still thinking on it. That's fine. It might take a bit of time for things to settle. So only contribute to the Menti if you feel you're ready to. I'm more than happy to chat to people outside of this session. This is kind of a whistle-stop tour, but as you can possibly tell, I'm quite into this, and we'll be really happy to talk to people outside of the session if they'd like to. But thank you for sharing your thoughts on the Menti. Thank you for your time this afternoon. I'll stop sharing my screen and hand back over to Alice.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful whistle-stop tour, as you said, through thematic analysis. I know you've been obviously answering questions as we've been going along, which is great. There was one interesting question that came up that's had a little bit of chat on the chat that maybe we can come back to if you're able to stay for another couple of minutes, which is about whether or not codes emerge. So apparently, so Sarah says, can or do codes emerge? Have been called out on that by journal reviewers in the past, and there was a bit of a discussion about whether codes emerge, or do we kind of create them? So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I'm just reading as I'm talking, reading through the other posts in response to Sarah's question. Yeah, so the idea, the verb emerge suggests codes and themes are passive. So I guess when it comes to themes, to me, I would say themes do emerge because we're grouping things together. And when it comes to codes, I guess they're already there in the data, but it's for us to identify them. So yeah, I think that's an interesting point, and something that I will need to think on. I'm not entirely sure is the honest answer. And I think it seems quite similar in the chat.
Brilliant. Does anybody else have any other questions that have emerged, or that were in the chat and we've missed them? I think you've got to pretty much all of them that I saw. Oh, Grace has got her hand up. Do you want to come in, Grace?
Yeah, so I do just have a question which has kind of been raised by Heba and Anna there in the chat. So do you like, what's your advice on sort of constructing the sort of thematic analysis yourself and then doing something like passing it through AI to see how that compares? Like, do you think that's a good thing? Do you not? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
So in my own practice, I would be nervous to pass things through AI unless I had the explicit kind of permission to do so. The reason for that is that obviously large language models are storing and saving all of our data and information that we feed into it. And so if I haven't checked or asked permission from my participants to use their responses in that way, then I wouldn't be permitted to put it into AI in the first place. So I think there's an ethical responsibility there, and I tend not to seek that permission myself. That being said, I will use AI to help test kind of the limits of some of my own thinking and my own writing. So using it as a kind of research companion in that sense. So, these are the codes that I generated. These are the themes that I'm kind of working with. This is the scholarship and the literature that I'm planning to use to help me understand and make sense of these themes. What do you think, ChatGPT or Copilot or whoever it might be? And I think that's a really productive dialogue, and that's a fabulous conversation to have, and it can stretch your thinking without compromising your participants' kind of use of their data. So I'm not feeding in the transcripts, I'm not feeding in their words. I'm just talking broadly about, these are the codes, these are the themes, this is where I'm going. Give me some kind of input, and that works quite well. I enjoy that process a lot.
Can I just like a very quick follow-up to that, which is do you ever use a kind of human companion and do it in pairs or in collaborative groups? And would you recommend that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my favorite type of research is when I get to work with other people. I find working solo research is good and it's great and there's a huge place for it. But a lot of the research that I do is with one colleague in particular. And so it does feel odd when I'm working on my own. And maybe that's why I find it really helpful to have that kind of dialogue with an AI. But yeah, working through qualitative research for the first time on your own can be quite isolating. So seek out other people as well, maybe colleagues like here in this group. They might be, excellent people to have that chat with and just be like, here's my mad idea. What do you think? Does that make sense or not? So yeah, absolutely.
And on that note, I think we are out of time, unfortunately. So I wanted to thank you very much once again for a fantastic seminar, and obviously getting lots of engagement from people. I will obviously publish the recording for this. Don't forget on the note of talking to other people. We've got our next peer support group coming up, and the follow-up seminar to this about focus groups. So you can obviously sign up to those on our website. So thanks very much again to Hannah, and hope to see you all next time. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.